Declare the meeting open. Have we got any apologies for absence, Neil?
No apologies, Chair, but Beth Rowland is joining the meeting on Teams.
Okay, right. Minutes of previous meeting. Has anyone got any comments on the minutes? Anybody who was here, that is. Will we have a quick show of hands? I think that's everybody. I put mine up as well. 1 minute lost. Yes, declarations of interest. Are there any?
Thank you. Just to say that I am also on the project board for the Barkham Solar Farm and therefore overviewing and scrutinising myself in one respect this evening. So I will comment appropriately during that item.
Okay, thank you. Public question time. So I believe we have a question this time, which is very exciting.
Thank you.
Okay, Helen, go ahead.
Okay. The recent introduction of new bus shelters across Wokingham Borough has brought digital advertising screens to the bus stops for the first time. We believe that the current Wokingham Borough Council advertising sponsorship policy is inadequate to control the advertising that these screens show. Given the UK's obesity and diabetes crisis, as well as the Council's commitment to addressing the climate and ecological emergency, we ask, will the Council adopt an advertising and sponsorship policy that bans advertising for high-fat, salt and sugar foods and high-carbon and fossil fuel advertising, as has already been done in Sheffield and many other councils around the country, as well as Transport for London, where research has shown significant positive impacts on health from this policy?
Oh, thank you very much for your question. I do have an answer, which I'll read out. We are aware of ensuring any advertising and sponsorship is aligned to our policy priorities and continue to keep under review our approach and policies. To this end, council officers are currently working on a new advertising policy to ensure clarity in our requirements, and we'll be reviewing the current sponsorship policy as part of that work. We will be working with internal specialists and political members to agree a timeline, further engagement, and the approval and adoption of the new policy. In the meantime, as part of our specification, the bus shelter advertising provider is required to follow statutory and general guidelines, specifically that all advertisements must adhere to the codes of conduct laid down by the most recent advertising regulations and advertising standards authority or any other code of practice applicable during the agreement period, and must not conflict with the council's policies. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, we do. Yeah. We think it is important for citizens of Wokingham to have an ethical and low carbon advertising and sponsorship policy in place soon. Councillors have been telling us since April 2024 that council officers are working on a policy. Could you please advise us who these officers are so that we can ask them what their timeline is and whether there will be citizen involvement in the policy?
So I can partially answer that, but basically we'll give you a written answer. I mean, it's the commercialisation team that is looking at the new policy, and they will be bringing it to this committee. But I don't know about public engagement, so we'll give you a written answer.
All right, thank you.
Okay, on to, well, have we got any members' questions?
No member questions, Chair.
Okay, renewable energy generation projects. This is what we've all been waiting for ages. And Stephen is here, and David is online to answer questions about this.
Well, I don't really have very much to say. I'm here really filling in for the executive member, so I'm very happy to hand over to Mari and David to lead off on this. And if there are any political questions, I'll endeavour to answer those.
Thank you, Steve. David, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. I haven't prepared a presentation as such because the report is the report. It is an update on the 3 solar farms that are set out within the Climate Emergency Action Plan. As it stands, Barkham Solar Farm is progressing well. We are currently still on programme and within budget, and we're looking to start those works summer of this year for connection in summer of 2026. The solar farm Site 2 has been identified and feasibility work and options appraisals have begun. We've agreed a budget within the MTPF, but we're not at this moment in a position to announce that specific site. And Solar Farm 3, we have now identified an opportunity at Meadow Park and Ride to put canopies over the existing Park and Ride facility. Again, a budget for that has been agreed in the MTPF. And but first, we do need to secure planning permission for that site, and that planning application will be likely expected later this year.
Thank you, David. We've obviously got questions. I was just going to say, sometimes people go on and on and on with their questions. Can we just have kind of 2 at a time? Couple, 1 or 2 questions at a time, and then we'll go around again. Sorry, Peter, I was looking at Peter when I was saying that.
When you were saying that, I won't take it personally. Don't worry. The first simple point is on Solar Farm Site 3. We're quoting kilowatt hours. The other solar farms were using megawatt peak. Can we have a consistency in terminology? Most people stick with megawatt peak, so if we could pop that in instead of the kilowatt hours.
Yeah, no, that's good feedback, and most of you raised that as well. So we will look to have consistency across the actions to have megawatt peak across the 3 solar farms. We will keep kilowatt hours because that's what we use across the CAP, and that is what we use to get the carbon saving, but we can have that consistency.
My second question is about the business case for the Barkham Solar Farm. So when it was signed off, we produced I'm sorry, show you that because I didn't print it out. It was a spreadsheet showing the kind of over the years costs and expenses and the benefits. I think when we're going through these sort of stages, we should be updating that, presenting that again, because that was what was signed off. That was the business case over the many years was signed off, and I think at each stage of the project we should be updating that just to confirm that the figures may be even better now because of course costs have gone up, but electricity prices have gone up. So can we have that updated? Mary, I know you sent me the figure, but that's just a summary figure. I think to have the full business case is important when we're going through these different stages of the project. So if I can ask for that. And the other third one is, and I've asked this before, Site 2, we've just been told we can't announce the site details. We could in the Part 2. And I think it's, as a scrutiny committee, as a council, we should know where this site is, understand roughly where it is, so that we can assess it. But it's all been kept secret for some reason. So I know the reason. I know there are tenants that haven't been informed, etc. But as a Part 2 item, we should know where Site 2 is.
Okay. So have either of you got something to say about the business case?
I can come in about this business case. So we have updated the business case as the project has progressed. I think the business case that Peter showed us there was the business case that was attached to the original approval of the project back in 2020 now. We have since updated it and presented it back into overview and scrutiny twice now. So we presented it back in September 22 and then in February 24. And of course, I would remind you that we do have a cross-party project board, which is keeping a close scrutiny of the figures as well. So we are updating the business case as it is progressing. There would not be, I don't think, at this time, a massive benefit in representing that at this moment in time, because we would just be tweaking the 2004 figures that we previously presented. Over the next month, so Equans are going out to get quotes for the various sub packages of works that need to be completed for the farm, and once they've done that, they will be able to put together a final contract sum for us to scrutinise and agree before entering into the final construction contract. And we will need to be guided that that still presents value for money, but at that time we will have certainty over the actual construction costs. And also in the report I mentioned that we're currently out to the market, well, we're currently commissioning a market review of what we're actually going to do with the electricity, so which will inform the business case around the potential revenue that we can generate. At the moment, so far the business case has been presuming that we would retail the electricity, but there are various other options, including, for example, sleeving that to ourselves and reaping benefits in terms of using the electricity across our portfolio. But this market review will help us understand that in a bit more detail. So once those two pieces of work have been done, that's when the business case can properly be updated, and we will have very accurate figures of A, what the construction is going to cost us, and then B, what the returns could potentially be. So but we won't likely have that until the summer. So it's probably likely that if we are going to update the business case, it would be prudent to bring it back after that time. I will defer to Stephen on the part 2 element, if I may.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to do so, David, because I think it's more of a political question. I, as a general principle, don't think we should be presenting lots of part 2 items at overview and scrutiny, because it means the public has absolutely no knowledge what we're talking about. And in this case, there is no necessity. The committee will get sight of this at the appropriate moment. There are sensitivities about the tenant. I don't really want the tenant finding out inadvertently that this is intended if they have no knowledge of that from the council at this stage. And there are good reasons, it's all I can say. Well, we don't want to do this now, but we will, as soon as it's possible, make it clear to the committee where this location is.
I saw Adrian, I think, earlier.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to check my understanding of dates for Solar Farm 2. I presume we're going with the detailed dates in the next steps section of the report, and that the MTFP dates are therefore not the dates that we're expecting to actually spend the money in.
So for Solar Farm 2, we will have a better understanding from SSEN around our connection date around autumn time of this year. So at the moment, the whole connection process is going through reform, and as where previously it was a first come first connect process, there were a lot of speculative schemes that were holding up the system or blocking the system at the front, and also battery schemes were blocking the system at the front. So the reforms are aimed at removing those speculative projects from the queues and the battery projects from the queues, so that it frees up capacity at the various substations that need to be linked into. We have met with SSEN. We have been allocated a relationship manager with them, and the initial process for doing that is that they will be writing out to us over the next month or so, asking us to effectively prove our readiness going forward. So the reforms are bringing forward more of our first ready, first connect, as opposed to first received, first connect process. And that readiness will be proven through either a planning permission or ownership of the land, which we do own, so we can demonstrate that. And then from there, SSEN will need to resequence their queues based on the information that they receive back. And all that work is expected to accumulate around autumn next year, where they will be writing out and confirming connection dates at that time. So at that time, we will have firmer idea of exactly when we're likely to connect. Hopefully we'll be in the earliest, or we're confident we will be in the earlier pot, so to speak. So we'll get an earlier connection date, but until that time, we won't have certainty. So we suspect once we get that certainty, we'll be able to move forward with notifying the farmers, etc., because we'll have certainty that we can share with them at that time.
Thanks, David. So 28-29 is, I won't call it worst case, but we could come forward from 28-29. Is that what you're saying?
We're hopeful. We will work with SSEN as best we can, and if we can get allocated an earlier connection date through this reform process, then obviously the MTFP monies have been front loaded a little bit to enable us to move more quickly on the project in that respect.
Yeah, and I understand it's easier to move the money back than forwards. But that being the case, then Solar Farm 3 could potentially happen ahead of 2 still, could it?
We anticipate Solar Farm 3 will come forward in front of Solar Farm 2.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sarah, did you want to speak?
Sorry, yes, thank you. David sort of clarified. I just wanted to say that when we've got greater certainty on the connection times with SSEN, we will reprofile the monies in the MTFP over the years to accurately reflect that connection time. But David referenced that before I came in. So the MTFP will be updated in terms of that spend profile when we have that greater certainty on the dates.
Moses.
I want to go back to the unit of the energy, the 1.2 million kilowatts. Is that for the entire 15.3 million pounds, or is just a part of it?
So I'm not quite sure I understood the question. Could you repeat that?
I'm looking at Solar Farm Side 3. Yeah, you've quoted here about 1.2 million kilowatts unit of energy, which you've said you will correct to megawatts. I want to have an idea of what does that really translate in terms of kilowatt peak or megawatt peak compared to the 15, because it just looks too small in capacity for that amount of money.
So the size of the system, or the 1.2 million kilowatt hours, is based on a system of 1,500 kilowatt peak. So it is a smaller system than the other farms, and it will generate less electricity than the other farms. But we're looking at the capacity that we can achieve over that park and ride facility.
I think you need to check your numbers. I would expect 1,500 kilowatt peak to generate a lot more energy than 1.2 million kilowatt, except that's daily, but that's beside the point. But is that 15.3 million for this capacity, or there are more projects involved?
So Solar Farm 3 has a smaller budget allocated to it. We have currently 2.9 million allocated to the Solar Farm 3, which is a Mare Oak Park and Ride scheme. So that's smaller than Solar Farm 2 and Barkham Solar Farm, which are both. So Barkham Solar Farm is a 29 megawatt peak installation, so that's a massive, large-scale installation. And Solar Farm 2, at the moment, we've identified it as greater than 20 megawatt peak, but the size of that system will be borne out by the various feasibility tests that we need to do at the next stage of design.
So I'm trying to ask the question. I'm trying to reconcile the capacity you have here. with the amount of money that has been stated. So because there's a typical cost, 1 megawatt peak is typically about 1 kilowatt is about £1,000 per kilowatt peak. So when I see 15.3 million, I'm looking for a lot more sizable in terms of megawatt peak, not the 1.2, but that's something we're kind of concerned. But I want to go to Backham Solar Farm. You said you expect connection in summer. How did you decide that you can connect in summer 2025 without a program of works? Sorry?
It's 26.
Yeah, so it's okay, it's 26, yeah, but it still means we're about a year from now if you start in summer. I'm a bit skeptical that you can achieve that timeline and connect in summer 2026 because there's no program of works yet. The contract has not been agreed. Stephen is shaking his head. I'm asking for answers.
So we do have a program of works based on agreeing the contract sum in May and those works commencing on site in July. And there's no reason why we won't meet that program. We have entered into a two-stage design and build process with Equans, who are a contractor, and they've got a proven track record of delivering these facilities. So we're confident that they can do that for us. And we have also had agreement from SSEN about the connection date. And we're reliant on SSEN to do those works for us, to connect us into the grid. And they are telling us at this moment that they will connect us in early summer in 2026, which will allow us to connect into the grid at that time.
Okay, watch and wait.
Okay, Shona.
Just wondering, so going back to Barkham, the solar farm, in your benefits, you talk of generate a considerable net income for the council, but it's not quantified in any way. What does that?
So within the MTPF, we have 1 million per annum identified on average over the 25 years of the project or the lifespan of the project. So that's what we've included in the MTFP. The current business case that was previously presented into overview and scrutiny indicated that we would exceed that figure fairly considerably.
But what is fairly considerably? I can read the costs, but what profit are you expecting to make? What's your net gain? I mean, considerable means nothing really, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know whether it's helpful, David, for me to say anything here, and you to correct me if I've got this wrong, but it could be as much as 3 million averaged over the years. Is that correct, David?
Potentially, yes. Yeah. But as I said, in the MTPF, we've assumed 1 million in terms of being prudent with those assumptions.
Hi, David. Curious as to the rationale or strategy around looking at now canopy car park, which I think is great, but I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more to sort of why that's been identified as opposed to a kind of more agricultural land scheme and the pros and cons and relative costs per generation that gives, or is it a kind of bit of an exploration and trying different things?
I think it's a bit of an exploration and trying different things. I mean, it presents an opportunity to us. We have a large expanse there that we have seen an opportunity to provide that, and the Mare Oak Park and Ride is very well located in terms of the transport network, so there's potential to link that into EV charging and EV charging hubs in that location. So we see Mare Oak very much as a potential exemplar and a scheme that potentially we could start rolling out across the other car parks if we think it works well.
Just following on from that, I'm assuming the costs of putting up panels over a car park are higher than the costs of putting them on a field, which may sort of come back to what Moses was talking about.
It is a more technical mounting system, yes. So we will have to ensure that we maintain the park and ride facility underneath, maintain the operations of the park and ride facility underneath, because that's quite an important aspect of our strategic transport strategy. So there is additional costs associated with that, but having said that, we've worked those costs into the business case, and it is presenting a favourable return on that basis.
Thank you. I'm particularly excited about this, of course, because it's in my ward, and we really could do with better charging facilities because they're awful at the moment. Marie.
Thank you. When you talk about the with Barkham, the decision to moving forward, whether you're going to sell directly or whether you're going to sleeve it and use it for your, for our own use. I was wondering what criteria you're going to be using to make that decision. Is it about because it says the best payback opportunity, and that can cover multitudes, really, can't it? Because you can have sort of, we know that the price of energy is extremely volatile and unfortunately is likely to become more volatile. So, there's this kind of choice between resilience in having our own supply that we can count on, or sort of like being at the mercy of the market, as it were. So when you say payback opportunity, is that as brutal as it sounds? It's like, where can we get the most money the most quickly? Or what is the thinking that's going to guide that decision?
That decision, so we're effectively delivering the project. That decision will be a political decision about what we want to do with that electricity. The report that we've commissioned will help inform that decision, and it will help inform information about values, etc., that can then feed into that decision about what is the best way for the council to use that electricity, which may not just be financially driven. There may be other aspects that we want to take into account corporately under that guise.
And maybe I could just add, Marie-Louise, that as David said, the decision will need to be made a little bit nearer the time when we're better able to actually make an assessment of which would be the better choice. But both ways round, there's an opportunity to increase the amount of resource available for revenue services. Essentially, it goes into revenue. So it's either going in directly because we've sold the electricity, or it's going in indirectly in the sense we're not any longer having to cover the same costs for providing paying up electricity bill. So it will release money either directly or indirectly that we can use for service delivery.
Oh, Caroline.
Probably explained, I know with domestic electricity, there comes a point when you can't sell any more to the companies. That doesn't happen with these sorts of projects. They would take all our electricity that we can make.
Good question. I think it's more of a technical.
Sorry, it is a more technical question because I do know domestic, they just say, no, can't take any more.
Well, that will all be down to the contract that we enter into with the electricity provider, effectively. So that will be factored into the considerations moving forward and around the market review that we're having done at this moment. That all of that work will tease out as part of that.
Thank you.
Moses.
David, the first meeting I attended in July, I asked a question about the internal rate of return for Barkham Solar Farm, and I was told that it's not a commercial project, that it council. But here you're talking about payback. I'm wondering, how do you determine payback without consideration of internal rate of returns?
I'm afraid that's more a financial question that I may have to provide a written response to.
Moses, which report were you referring to? You just said July. What was the?
I'm saying that when we had the meeting in July, and I asked the question about a generic question about Barkham Solar Farm, what profit the council was expecting, and what was the internal rate of returns, because that determines your net present value and determines your payback period. Because payback is not elastic; it's a number of years. And I was told it's not a commercial project, but now somebody is talking about payback here, and I'm asking the question: how do you determine payback if you don't consider internal rate of returns? Because that feeds into payback.
I think, well, ever since the project has been conceived, we've always talked about the considered the level of return that we would get. And Stephen referenced, apologies, I can't remember if Stephen or David referenced earlier that there's a £1 million as a minimum level of return assumed within the MTFP. So there always has been an element of commerciality about this project. So I wasn't at the meeting that you just referenced in July where you told it wasn't a commercial project, but it has always been, and that rate of return is shown in the business case documentation that was referenced earlier that was presented as part of the executive papers. So I'm not quite sure I understand why it would have been said it was not a commercial project in July, when that has always been the case, that this project is obviously with its environmental credentials and achievements that it will bring, but also its level of commerciality to the council as well. So I think we might just need to look back at that meeting and understand the response that you were given then, and just make sure that we're all clear onto the position of it. But it certainly is very much a commercial project for the organisation as set out in the business cases that's been presented to date.
Just for clarity then, what is looking at this report, what is the payback period for this project?
We've assumed payback over 25 years, so the lifetime of the project, lifetime of the solar farm itself.
Okay, anybody else? I don't know anything about Grace. You'll be able to answer this for me. So it talks about being a small solar project for the Grace, but what solar farm site 3? What's small? How size? Are you covering the whole car park, or?
We will try and optimise the coverage of that car park. We need to design that yet, so we haven't commissioned a consultant to design it yet. But when they do, they will be charged with optimising the coverage of the car park.
So the car park's not there yet. So we're starting.
No, the car park is already there.
And then it's putting the parking spaces in with the canopies, or the old doing it over the canopy. The
car park is already operational and has been for several years.
So it's effectively inserting the canopies within the existing car park, but covering the car parking spaces with the canopies and optimising the number of panels that we can get into that site for the potential energy generation that they will return.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've seen lots of them abroad, and I think it's a superb idea. But I was just trying to visualise just how big it is and how, whether other areas if we can do it in. It's a great idea to give cars some shade to get the energy in and not be using farmland. I mean, to me, it's superb. But is there a minimum size? Is there?
I can share my screen. I've just called it up on Google Earth to give you an idea of the size that we're talking about. So this is the park and ride facility there. It's just off the A33. So we're looking to insert the canopies above those parking spaces that currently exist in that location.
So how many parking spaces are there approximately?
Oh, very good question. I don't know.
200, 350, 300, a few hundred.
600, according to my January.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. Oh, Moses, sorry.
Okay. This is not a question for me. This is just a comment and observation. Feeding back on what Caroline said, if we're going for 29 megawatt capacity, I would suddenly discover that SSEN would take a lot of it from us. Then the question is, what do we do with what we don't have? Secondly, if we are thinking about sleeving rather than selling to SSEN, it may prove a lot more expensive. So I'm not quite sure about these financial calculations. Typically in renewable, payback period is 25 years is what you do when you are talking about PPA and just paying tariff. A payback period is normally what determines your finance, whether a project is viable or not. So if at this stage a project is almost going to construction and we are saying payback is 25 years, for me, that doesn't seem a project that has been financially assessed to be viable.
Stephen.
I think I don't agree with you, I'm afraid, Moses. I understand your logic, but that's the payback period. It's not that payback won't occur until 25 years. It's the period in which there will be payback.
If I may, and I come back from a project finance trading background, so I think maybe Moses and I are speaking slightly more similar language, as I understand it. And I think maybe a few members of the committee who were on the council at the time when the financial models were presented have more information, because I'm in a similar boat to you, Moses. So is that something that we could request, is that, you know, the models and the financial model in detail, because I think it was I haven't found the Excel online. So if that could be either directed or shared with the committee, I think that might help us, because currently it doesn't quite make sense, but I very much hope that in terms of project finance payback period, from everything I've heard, it looks like we should be looking much shorter. And as I understand from David, both the cost side and the revenue side will be updated in the coming months, so by the summer. But I do understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's not a political question. It's just that you can't be doing a project and not be accounting for inflation and changes across the road. So it's not straightforward. It wasn't supposed to be political, Stephen.
Oh, Sarah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just coming back on that, I think more than happy to take as an action to provide the information previously provided for members who appreciate there may be new members who weren't with us when we went through the detailed business case previously. And then, as David said, once we have the updated business case, and I think it is worth waiting for the final contract sum prices to come back, which will be in the next couple of months, we could then come back to this committee with that updated business case and go through that, if that would be helpful.
Yes, I think it would. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I also just make a clarification just on a point that Moses made earlier? He referenced the 15.3 million, which is referenced on page 14 of the report in relation to Solar Farm Site 3. Just to confirm that the cost of Solar Farm 3 is not 15.3 million. We've got, out of that 15.3, there is 2.9 in the MTFP that's associated with the Mere Oak Park and Ride, and then the rest is available capital for us for even more future and further energy generation projects. So I just wanted to clarify that the 15.3 is not the cost of the Mere Oak Park and Ride solar farm.
Thank you. Caroline, I think you had a question.
It's not so much a question, but it's something in the future. We have solar panels at home and we have an app that shows us how much energy we're generating. And you're talking here on a comm site telling us, would we in the future be able to have a comm site for the residents to see how much the solar panel will be making every day for us? Because I know my husband would be fascinated. And if you know, Mike, you'd understand that. Thank you.
I don't know whether we have the technology for everyday live, but I think, David, we can take that back and understand how we can demonstrate its productivity and what it's generating. I think that's really important, a really important point. You know, there's a significant expense here, and we're using land, and it's really important that we're able to demonstrate to people what they're getting for that investment and that generation. So we'll definitely take that back, Caroline. I'm not sure on the technology of what we can do, but we'll pose the question and we can come back and report back to the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, have we exhausted that topic? Thank you, and thank you very much, both of you, for answering our questions.
Thank you.
Okay, go on to item 44, CAP format changes, which is in response to questions from this committee. Myri?
Yeah, thank you. So just to kind of summarise the report, so we've captured feedback over the past year from this committee, as well as from residents, as well as we've reviewed high-scoring council action plans through the climate action scorecard process. We've had discussions as well internally, so that's with officers involved in the climate emergency action plan. So, and what we've tried to do in the proposed changes is balance the amount of information that people want to see without having a public facing strategy being too lengthy, because we recognise a lot of the actions that sit in the CAP. There is a lot of detailed documentation that sits behind each action, as discussed tonight with the solar farms. There's a lot of information there if needed. But one of the consistent messages we've had across all the groups we've spoken to is the simplification. So to make it clearer and to make it simpler. I think last year it was over 100 pages, the document. So we just want to kind of make it crisper and clearer. Another thing that's come out from this committee is the RAG status. So this has come up in a few of these meetings. So we really wanted to look at that and see how we could kind of change it. So when you as a committee look at the report, you can see more clearly where each target is with the where we are against the target we've set in the CAP. So we really hope the changes that are proposed in the report will make it more engaging for officers, for members, and for our residents. Any questions?
Adrian.
Thanks. Yeah, when I first read it, my sort of project management background, and I saw that we were planning to remove costs and schedule, I had a bit of an allergic reaction, but I stuck with it, and I do understand what you're trying to achieve, and I think in the context of this report, that's probably a good decision. The example you gave was a relatively simple example where everything's green. I just wonder how that format's going to work on a more complicated case where it's not green, so it's amber or red. We've just got a top-level traffic light, but we've lost visibility of the status of the individual elements beneath it. And I think at that point, those line items might not make sense to the reader. So that was my first question. So sort of how would we deal with that?
So I think if we think about domestic retrofit, because I think that we know is quite a challenging action that we have. So I think I see how there's an opportunity with the proposed changes is if that was red, we can look below and see all the actions we have against that red target. But we can look to say, actually, do we need to add in more actions under this target because it is red? Or do we need to have a look to see what status each of these actions are at? If some are at 1 and just that idea stage, it means we need to kind of prioritise that action because it is a red, it's red against that target. So I see it kind of gives us a bit more flexibility. It also hopefully will mean we have, if there is actions that sit under some targets where they're not progressing, we can, instead of just keeping going, with actions, that there's constant barriers. We can look at taking that out and looking at what are other councils doing, what other organisations doing to meet this target, and then introducing them as an action to help meet those red and amber targets that we have. But I think so the proposal is we update the CAP this year with the changes that we've suggested, and then as part of that process, it will highlight it actually if it doesn't work for some areas, we could look at tweaking it. But I think it should. We have had a look at the throughout the report and with this new format, and it seems to work.
Yeah, I think that for me, an example where everything's going well doesn't really prove the case. What I'd like to see is an example of something, maybe the one you suggested, where it's not green. And how are we going to tease out the detail in that so that the reader can understand why it's not green? And in this committee previously, we've talked about having a return to green plan on the things that are not green. And I don't know whether that's intended, but I didn't see that in the report.
Yeah, and that was something we picked up on from a previous ONS committee, and we do. We want to incorporate that into the process, but within the current status. So where we have actions that are at idea stage or at 1 or 2, or they've got a red or amber against their target, we can put within that current status, this is where we're at and these are the next steps. This is how we move this action forward. So that will be incorporated within the current status.
Okay. And then, so just coming back to sort of where I started, it's just if we're saying something is green, it has to be green against some criteria. If we're not including the criteria in the plan, how is this committee in particular going to assess whether that's a fair assessment?
So we will have so for the targets, we're putting the RAG against the targets because we have there is specific numbers at that stage. So, for example, the action we've given increased the mileage share from public transport to 10%, and that would be by 2030. So that's where you as a committee can see that, and we'd put in where we're currently at. So hopefully that should give you the information you need to see how are we doing against that target.
Yeah. So as long as all of the actions are smart to the level to which they need to be smart, then I think that'll work. But it looks like, looking at the example you gave, it looks like in some cases there's going to need to be another sort of row of information, whether that's return to green or defining what the issues are that are keeping it from being green. But it doesn't feel like we're quite there yet without seeing a more complicated example.
Yeah, and I think the plan is we will share this, the full CAP in June or July when the meeting's scheduled, and then that might provide the more information and more seeing it across the different actions. Hopefully that will give you the reassurance that the information you need is there.
It might do, but if it doesn't, does that mean we'll be asking you to go away and rewrite it all, or I don't know at what stage we're seeing it? Do we see it as a draft, or do we see a final version? Because I think the aim of this was to get comments on the format and to say I'm not quite convinced by what I've seen so far. I think we need to see a little bit more on a more complicated example.
So perhaps after we can share another example of a red or amber or a red and amber and circulate that with the committee outside of the committee, and get that comments that way.
Yeah, thank you. I think that would be a good idea if you could circulate it with a date for comments. Andrew.
Yeah, just to reiterate a little bit in terms of we mentioned like the amber to green and the red to green steps. So just as an example, I know we've talked about it is still there. It's just that the specific wording of red to green has been removed. So I think the example we sent was the public transport one. And under that 1A 2.3 in the current status there, the second paragraph about it will be revisited. So that's the same wording at this stage. So we haven't fully updated that section, but that's an example of the red to green that was there previously. So that is still there because that action is a 2 on the project state, the new project stages. So I think that gives you an idea. The reason we've taken it out is it just, to us, it looks a little bit messy when you have red to green in just some actions. So it's hoped that the current status is reflected enough. If it's the case that that's not sufficient, then we can look at a slightly different way of doing it, but it's just to reassure that it is still there.
Katrine.
Hi, just on the value for money assessment, I think it's so if I understand correctly, I think it's useful in terms of getting a bit more granularity in terms of how much carbon saving per pound spent. I guess what wasn't clear to me from this proposal is that still kind of the intent would be, okay, we think this will save 23 tons next year and it's going to cost X, and literally divide the two regardless of where the money comes from, because I can see there's a lot more factors in here. So how are you intending to present that? Will there be almost like a separate more detailed place to see that for each item, or is that going to be somehow molded into the kind of main report?
Yeah, so we don't want to put it in the report because there's a lot of detail in there. There's a lot of detail on like the source of the funding, and that's one of the reasons the finances were taken out, because not having the information of where that the finance is coming from, it means actually doing an assessment without that information isn't that worthwhile. So that will sit alongside the report. It won't be public facing. I know we've spoken previously about having it shared with the committee, so it's something that we will share as part of the CAP update in June, July.
I think that sounds like a good balance in that there's significantly more information available, and I guess gives me almost comfort that those factors are being looked at in the prioritisation without necessarily muddying the waters with, you know, this grant here and that fund there and this council money here.
Okay, shall we move on if there aren't any more questions? So the next item is item 45, the work programme. So I think we were talking earlier about removing this CAP update from the.
Just a quick reminder that at the previous meeting, the committee agreed to an extra meeting in April or May. So we're trying to find a suitable date. There are some items still on the work programme which haven't been considered yet, and those are set out on page 23. So I think the discussion is, yes, we're having another meeting, and is the committee happy that those are the work programme issues still outstanding?
Yeah, except that we were already talking about maybe taking out the update, because I think Mary thought it was too soon.
Yes, so the CAP update, if that can come June, July time.
We've definitely got flood management coming, haven't we? Because the officer is ready. He's available on all the possible dates.
And procurement as well.
And procurement. So anybody got any? No, all right. Okay, draft work programme for next year. Has anyone got any comments on this on page 25?
So again, this is the Scrutiny Management Committee is going through the process of looking at all the work programmes for next year in discussion with yourselves and with directors and with executive members. So this is just a first draft of items for next year. So the committee may want to consider whether the previous year has been a success in terms of the way it's handled its scrutiny work, and in terms of whether it might want to, for example, include more external speakers next year, or examples of best practice, or basically it's there for anybody to have any thoughts and suggestions for next year.
Yes, I thought it would be useful to have some other local authority input from, I was just talking to Mary about it earlier. Do you think the deep dives have been useful, and should we continue that sort of approach?
I think they have. Yeah, I mean, there was a small number of actions in the CAP which covered the vast majority of the carbon savings, don't they? And I think that's where we should be focusing our efforts still.
I get just to comment, I found the external speaker quite energizing when we were discussing community energy, and I thought it was an excellent way. I mean, I'm fairly new to Scrutiny, but I thought it was a good way to kind of raise our eyes above and try and learn what's going on elsewhere, and what we could learn from other authorities or other, whether it's partners or ways of working. So I think that's certainly something I'd welcome. Perhaps in a few different areas, not just in the renewable generation side.
Yeah. I'm sure we can, be thinking about this and, let Mary know let Neil know if anything you want adding, or Stephen, sorry, ignoring you.
No, that's okay. I'm used to it. The mention of the University of Reading, I think, is very important. I think Mary's involved in the strategic partnership working with the university, and one of the work streams is climate emergency, and they obviously have a high level of expertise there that we have an opportunity to draw on. So it's obviously for the committee to decide, not me, but it would seem like a very, very good idea to have a presentation from the university.
Mm. Peter.
I just so happen to be having conversations with Professor Christopher Merchant, who's the Professor of Ocean and Earth Observation, and he has actually said that he'd be willing to come along to do a presentation. So I can give you his contact details.
Give them to Neil. Okay, on to the action tracker. Page 27. Page 28. Okay, no one's got anything to say. I think I'll thank the officers for attending, Mary, and also Stephen. Thank you for standing in again. And I'll declare the meeting closed.